All right, guys. Well, here we are, another episode of Friend Fridays. And I'm really excited because today's the first time that I've had somebody on the show that I was actually incarcerated with. And I've talked about him before, but let me refresh your guys' memory. So, the guy's name is Ryan Ramnarace. I met him when I was at Federal Correctional Institution, Oxford, and this was in Oxford, Wisconsin. I had been shipped out there from Victorville, I believe in 2010, to take the drug and alcohol program, residential drug and alcohol program, which is the only program in the federal system that awards you a time off your sentence. I'm sure you guys remember I got in trouble at this place and I wanted to check my celly's paperwork. I don't know why I was on some sort of political trip at this place because it wasn't that kind of atmosphere. It was the kind of place where you could stay in your own lane, but I was foolish. I got kicked out. They took a year from me. And as I can recall, that's probably one of two times that I cried my entire 5-year term when I was in federal prison, having to call my dad and tell him that I wasn't coming home in 3 or 4 months like we had thought, right when I was going to graduate the program. I was going to be coming home in 14, 15 months, whatever it was. That was a really hard phone call, made me cry. I remember that. And, you know, Oxford had drugs, but it was much more hush hush. We've talked about it in my 5 years in federal prison series. It wasn't as overt as it was in other prisons that I'd been to, but it was there. It's definitely there. It's an insider club at this place. And when I started getting in trouble, I got introduced to that, kind of underbelly of the prison. And I started hanging out with scumbag drug addicts because that's what you do when you're a scumbag drug addict. You gravitate towards other scumbags. And at a certain point, I met Ryan. Now, Ryan, I believe, had been sentenced to 18 years in the feds. He was there on a cocaine conspiracy. I believe he served 15 years. He's going to come on in a second, and he'll tell his story. We'll get into it. But he was a very well respected person at this prison. Well respected because of the way he carried himself. He was just, as they say, the proverbial convict. He carried himself correctly. When he would meet you, he'd squeeze your hand, he'd look you right in the eyes. He had been schooled correctly in prison. Apparently some really solid guys had taken him under their wing when he first got busted, and they had taught him what was to be expected of him during the course of his lengthy incarceration, which is, it's ludicrous to think that he served that much time when there's certain states that you can murder somebody and serve that or even less. In California, I know people that have gotten convicted of murder and they've served less than 15 years. And he used the time to better himself. And so while I was involved with the scumbag underbelly, he was kind of always in the background, and he didn't associate himself with people like me, not because he had an air of superiority, just because he was a smart convict. He's doing an 18-year sentence for being involved with the drug world. It's certainly nothing he wanted to be involved with once he was that deep in a sentence. And I think I'd met him when he was about, I think he'll come on, but I think I had met him. He'd already been down like 11 years, 12 years, something like that. And he'd been away for a long time. And he was also one of the most physically fit men that I've ever met in my entire life. To look at him, you would think that he was on steroids. He'd been lifting weights for over a decade when I met him, and he literally looked like he was on steroids. He one of these guys that had like 3-4% body fat, and he's benching like 300 pounds, whatever the case. He literally seemed superhuman to me. That was my perspective. And he was also one of the most intellectually sophisticated people that I'd met in my entire life. Now, at one point, I got close to going home. I was like within the year mark, and we had some conversation. I'm not sure what his impression of me was. I was certainly getting in a lot of trouble at this place, so I'm sure that he kind of, as the wise older Al, kind of looked at me as, okay, that kid's running amok in prison. He's probably a liability, and eventually he's going to get himself in a wreck, which I seem to have the propensity towards. And at a certain point, I saw, I think based just on what his physique was, I wanted him to train me. And I'd asked him to do that. And he basically gave me a bar work regimen, which was push ups, pull ups, and dips. It was in the summertime, I believe. And I think he gave me that assignment. He said, yeah, we can work out, but first I want to see you do this, as kind of a test to see if I was actually committed to it or not. Because a lot of people say that, hey, I'm going to work out. Oh, yeah, I'm sick of being shot out. Just like people in the free world who get a gym membership in January and they buy the sweat headbands and they get the waterproof iPod buds and they're just like, yeah, I'm gonna go hard. And then come February 2nd, they're like, I'm cool. I am cool. I'm just gonna do ab exercises at home and watch ab videos. And they never do. That's why we have an obesity problem in the United States and the world at large. But for the first time, I was starting to get more self-disciplined. I'd already been writing Wasting Talent, so I was already getting used to a system of routine. So when he assigned me the pull-ups, push-ups, and dips, which by the way, we had a pull-up bar and a dip bar in our housing unit. So it's something we didn't have to go to the gym to do this. You could wake up at 5 a.m. and go do bar work if you wanted. And that's something that I eventually started doing. But I did stick to it. And he saw me. I think when he assigned me that, I couldn't even do one pull-up. And I'd already been working out for like a year. I just hadn't been doing it right. And he told me what I needed to do. And within about 6 weeks, my body started transforming. It was the most results I'd ever seen in the shortest amount of time. And within that 6-week period, I went from not being able to do one pull-up to being able to do 10 consistently. And then eventually I could do 10 sets of 10. So I could do 100 pull-ups, which, seemed like science fiction, at that point, because it was so hard for me. Pull-ups are a compound exercise and they're very difficult. So once I'd proven to Ryan that, I was adherent to discipline and that I actually took direction, he took me under his wing. Now he was and I've talked about it before, he was in a very well-regarded workout car at this prison. Now, what does that mean? It means that he had, he was in a workout car that was so respected that people would hold certain prized weights for him. Like there's a limited amount of flat benches. There's only a couple. And at a certain time every day, I believe it was right after dinner, Ryan would have all the weights, all the dumbbells, all the things that he needed for his routine already waiting for him. And that was just out of respect. Now, it may seem like not a big deal, but when you're in a prison with 800 or 900 men and everybody's competing to get the top weightlifting equipment, it is a big deal. And he had earned that just by being a solid convict at this institution for so long. And I started working out with him. And at the time, I think I could bench like 135 pounds, maybe, if that. I remember back then just doing the bar 20 times was a big deal for me. And I'd already started getting results from doing the bar work. Now that I was lifting weights, I really started seeing a transformation. And around this time, you know how the story goes, I started doing heroin, on the side. And we were just talking about this the other day. He knew what was going on, but he, just, I don't know. I think he wanted me to run my own course and, see how it played out, whatever it was. I end up getting a dirty drug test. I go to the whole solitary confinement, like real solitary confinement, not like I didn't have a cellie type of thing. And usually you go to the hole and you have a cellie or whatever. They were disciplining me because they wanted me to snitch on where I got the drugs from, and I wouldn't do it. Ended up doing 60 days in there just for a dirty drug test, which I thought was pretty inhumane, pretty harsh. While I was in there, my grandfather died. I had a cathartic experience. I got out of the hole and I went back to work out with Ryan in the car. Now, one of the guys in the car was Nick Kempton, who was a dear friend of ours. Talked about him several times, and he just passed away from cancer, which is really unfortunate because he was a great guy. He did get out for about a year under the Compassionate Care Act, which is like a very little used, obscure law that the feds reserve just for people that are literally about to pass away. And I went back to work out with these guys, and Ryan's like, nope, you can't work out with us anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, nah, you chose going off and shooting heroin instead of being on this course that we had designed for you, this path of developing into a better person, if you will. And that was heartbreaking for me. It's like finally I was at this place and I was starting to be respected outside of just the, toothless drug addicts that were like, yeah, no, we're friends. Hey, let me borrow $40 to a store. I'm like, okay, you're my friend here, and that's, these shallow friendships that mean nothing. And like those guys were real, they were solid guys, real friends, people you could depend on, my brothers. And that was devastating for me. I started working out with other people, and eventually they saw that I got on the right path because I'd sworn off getting back on drugs. Um, and I didn't, and I stayed clean for 3 years after that particular incident with the solitary confinement. Now, Ryan, Nick, that car, it was about 4 of us, 5 of us. It was indispensable for me. That was the most transformative part of my entire life. And Ryan, not only trained me on the physical side, but we just had a lot of, very deep conversations about what we wanted to do, what our goals and ambitions were when we got out. I wanted to be a writer. He wanted to get involved in the academia side of criminology and wherever that took him, whether that be altruistic activity where he's helping other people. But he thought that, he'd used his whole time to study, and he could be an awfully effective voice for change, and he knew that he could affect change. And we would talk about this, what our ambitions were. And out of all the people I've done time with, we've stayed in touch. We're part of a very small minority of people that have actually done what we set out and said we were going to do. He had an incredible impact on my life, and he's been out for about 5 years. Ryan literally has done more in that 5-year period than 95% of people I know, as far as accomplishments go. He's one of the co-founders of the, the tongue twister aspect of this has gotten me several times. He co-founded the formerly incarcerated college graduate network, which essentially helps people that were formerly incarcerated with their educational goals. And we've talked about it several times. He focused on education while he was in prison, thus one of the reasons that he had such a strong rehabilitative experience while he was in prison, but it's not something that's offered to people. And usually the ones that actually do that are doing it voluntarily. And he understood that, if you apply it to a larger scale, it can be very effective with helping put people on the right path so that they never have to go back to prison again. He legitimately went in there a criminal, and he left there completely reformed. He's also on the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council in Sauk County in Wisconsin. And that's a huge deal. He's actually working with he's actually working with his county to affect change. Again, he's actually applying the things that he had learned in prison to make real, tangible changes to the community around him. And he has been working for several years with assisted medication treatments, Suboxone with opioid addicts. Now, he was never an opioid addict himself, but he certainly sees the value in helping other people get back on the right track, get off the drugs, and he had a profound impact on me. Ryan is one of 3 of the most influential and intellectual people I've met my entire life. I can say that. I tell him that all the time. And, I know how people, whoa, dude, shoot. No, I know what you guys will say. I spent so long on this monologue just telling you what a good dude my friend was. But without further ado, let's get his side of the story. He, even if you've done time, I feel like Ryan, is a beacon of hope. PBS just did a segment on him that's going to be nationally syndicated, something to be very proud of. And he can be a beacon of hope for people that have been incarcerated. But if you haven't been incarcerated, it can help give you an understanding of some of the challenges that we face, why education is an important component to curb recidivism. Recidivism. God, I'm just on a tongue twister roll today. And another thing is you might not be doing time, but all life is a balance with structure, and some people are lopsided in that balance. Therefore, some people aren't happy, or they're not accomplishing the things that they want to accomplish. And you can apply the things that he learned in prison, a very combative, volatile, morose atmosphere where everything is messed up. And if he could make these kind of long-lasting changes in there, these things can be applicable to anybody. The lessons that he learned, he's an infinite wealth of information. So, I have no idea how long that introduction was, but that was a record. I was going hard. I was going for endurance. So without further ado, let's get Ryan Ramnarace, and I'm going to let him tell his side of the story. We already talked about this beforehand. I'm like, I'm going to talk for a long time because I can never shut up and people criticize me for it. And I'm going to give you an opportunity just to talk with me uninterrupted. So, Ryan, there you go.
Thank you, Ryan, for that very nice introduction. Thank you for having me on. I know we talked about it. Our schedules never lined up. You're busy. I'm busy. There's a lot of really kind of neat things going on, I think, in both of our lives, and I think that's great. There's not a lot of people, obviously, that get out and have the kinds of opportunities that we've managed to, I'll just say, magnetize to ourselves, right? And so a little about me. The way that I grew up, I can give you a little bit of background there. I kind of grew up in a chaotic family environment. Definitely very different kind of than Ryan's background and where you grew up. And so I grew up poor. I grew up in a predominantly white community, and I was one of the few people in my community that had dark skin. So that brought challenges, certain kinds of challenges, racial challenges. I did a lot of fighting growing up as a result of racism and things like that. Also, I grew up in an environment where and the reason I'm sharing this is not because I'm looking for sympathy or I'm doing any of that. The truth is that these kinds of experiences that I had a profound impact on my own self-image, and then later on in the development of my criminal persona, right? Another one of those factors, though, I'll get back to it real quick, was that my mother met and married an alcoholic, a carpenter, and he was violent. And so my brother and I actually experienced violence for years from our stepfather. Now, how does that all play out? What does that all look like? It's kind of funny because later on, I did come to a place where I understood a theoretical, it was called lifestyle theory. There was a theoretical perspective that was put forward. It was called lifestyle theory. And essentially what it said was this. And it's funny because this resonates with me, and it always resonated with me. I never really understood why I became a criminal in the first place. It just seemed like that's who I'd always been. But one of the ideas of this was that if you experience trauma at a young age, if you have tough experiences, depending on what your narrative is at the time, you can maladapt to those tough experiences. And the way that you shore up these perceived weaknesses or inadequacies of your early life is that you create a criminal persona. And so really what I did is I became violent. I was constantly into trouble, constantly in trouble with authority. I had a huge problem with authority. And I spent a lot of my time in detention and suspension. I started having brushes with the law. At 15 years of age, I was adjudicated delinquent. I was taken out of the home. I went to a facility. I went to a foster home. 18 years of age, I ended up charged with, I think I was facing 45 years for multiple felony counts. I ended up getting 2 felony convictions. So at that point, now I'm a convicted felon. There's nothing else for me to think about. My life is over. I'm a felon. And so it made it easier for me to reject kind of the idea of being a part of law-abiding society at that point, because I believe the law-abiding society would never accept me. So bad you've labeled me, then bad I'll be. And so anyway, I was kind of opportunistic. I lived primarily by committing crimes. That's how I lived. Okay. So at age 27, I was arrested by the FBI in Madison. And I was told, essentially, you have a statutory max of 20 years. If you cooperate, we will lessen your penalty. If you don't cooperate, we're going to give you 20 years. If you cooperate, you'll get 5 years. You go to a camp. That'll be it. And I said, basically, yeah, I'm not doing it. Go to hell. I'm not doing it. Give me the 20 years. And the feds were lying. They gave me 18 years, 8 months. I ended up with 224 months. Didn't cooperate, went down. And then they even threatened to go after my pregnant girlfriend at the time. She was pregnant with my youngest child, my son Ryan, my namesake. So I went away and I arrived at the federal prison at Oxford on September 10th of 2001. So the day before 9/11 happened is when I actually was transported there by the U.S. Marshals. So there's that, everybody has the saying, right? It's like, I went in alone, I'm leaving alone, whatever. Guys often say that, especially when they don't agree with popular opinion inside prison. Well, I came in here alone, I'm leaving alone, fuck you, whatever. But I literally went into prison alone. I was taken in by 2 U.S. Marshals, walked in by myself. I didn't arrive on a bus or any of those kinds of things. I never did Con Air or any of those kinds of things. I was actually taken from Dane County Jail in Madison. After I was sentenced, I was driven to Oxford, maybe about an hour and a half away, and taken in and dropped off by myself. So I showed up, how it goes. You go through R&D, receiving and discharge. Going through R&D, I get the standard questions. Did you cooperate? No. Is there any reason you can't be on this compound? No. Have you ever been a victim of sexual assault? Do you believe that there's any reason you can't be here? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I go out and I get dropped off in medical, and I got my little A&O card, right? Admission and orientation card. Remember that card? And so I go out, and when they dress you out, of course, you come in and you have khakis. They dress you from your street clothes into your khakis. They put you in a T-shirt with a great big, I don't know, XL, XXL, whatever size T-shirt, all markered on the front, and you're put in like blue boat shoes. So everybody on the compound, anybody who's ever done federal time, they know that those are blue shoes, right? So you're a new dude on the compound. So they kicked me out into medical, and this is how I arrived at Oxford. I go out into medical. They say, you got to get your card signed. You're going to have to go around to all these different departments to get your card signed. That was it. I didn't know what unit I was in. I wasn't told to go to the lieutenant's office and find out where my cell is. I wasn't told anything. I was actually literally kicked out into medical with a little white card and told, go get your signatures. So I have no idea where I'm even supposed to go. So I'm standing in medical waiting for, to get a card signed, because that's what I was told to do. And a guy is sitting there and he sees my blue shoes, and of course he knows I'm a new dude. Just showed up. Either I came from the street or I transferred from another institution, right? But there was no bus that came in, so obviously I'm just a new dude. So he says, from here. He's like, hey, he goes, where are you from, man? And I'm like, Baraboo, Wisconsin. Oh, there's some guys here from Baraboo. And he tells me, do you know so-and-so? Or he asked me, he's like, do you know so-and-so and so-and-so? Yes, I do. He says, I know exactly where those guys are. They call lunch. They take me to them. Wham. Next thing you know, my friends, some of my criminal associates actually that were in there already waiting for me to arrive. They knew I was going to land someplace in the Midwest. And so there were actually people at about 5 different other institutions in the Midwest that were waiting for me to show up. And so I was taken to a unit. Guy comes out, gives me a couple big bags of commissary. I don't even have a cell yet. I don't even know where I'm living. And I got 2 big bags of commissary. I'm like, well, I don't know where I'm taking this stuff. Like, the guy says, well, you know what? Go to lunch. I have these here for you. By the way, you got to go see so-and-so and so-and-so. They got bags for you too. And that's essentially how it went. So I went to lunch, was taken to the initial unit that you had to go to when you came to this prison. It was called Woodhouse, which I wasn't even directed there. I had to have prisoners tell me where I needed to go. So I go down to Woodhouse, they classify me, and they give me my cell. So then I go back out, and I go out and I retrieve these bags of commissary that were waiting for me when I arrived. And I was given everything from toiletries to, toiletries, clothes, food, stamps. And they explained the stamps were currency in there that I could use them to buy sandwiches or, whatever. I mean, that was our currency, right? So I go back up, and the next thing you know, I start connecting to the other people there that know me and knew that I was potentially coming there. Shortly after that, I was taken to the compound. I was introduced to everybody. I met all the shot callers of all the different gangs and all the different cars, and I was brand new. And my experience was not the typical experience, because it doesn't usually happen where somebody just coming into prison. I had never been to prison before. I had done cumulatively 3.5 years prior to my incarceration in prison. 3.5 years, but in counties. All my time was done in county jails. Okay, on and off on the installment plan for, well, from 18 years of age until 27, when I ended up getting hit by the feds. So anyway, I go back out, or I go out, I meet all these people. Now I'm kind of getting schooled initially about how the institution runs. And my friends that were there said, well, you got to get your paperwork sent in. They want to look at this paperwork. Of course, I'm talking about the docket sheet or the pre-sentence investigation report, so that they can check out your stuff, make sure you're not a rat. I said, okay, no problem. This is right at the time that they quit allowing people to have their PSIs. So there were some interesting things going on politically inside the prison in regard to guys claiming they couldn't get their PSIs. Anyway, I get my PSI sent in with a bunch of other paperwork. It comes in, and at mail call, they call my name, and one of the guys who was calling shots for, I want to say the Kings, Land Kings. Anyway, we had become very fast friends as a result of this introduction that was done by a friend of mine, Melvin. And I get my paperwork, I pull it out, and there's my PSI. And there were some people that were there apparently that didn't have their paperwork, and he said, okay, so I just saw with my own eyes that you got your paperwork in. So my guys really got absolutely, these guys who are not offering up their stuff, they have zero excuse. So anyway, I basically come in and created a controversy for some of them just by virtue of the fact that I had it sent right in. So after it was reviewed by the various cars, one of the first people that I met there too was the guy who was calling it for the Southsiders, right? And obviously at this time there were Southsiders, there were Nortes there were every other kind of gang represented, so on and so forth. Anyway, he was one of the people that I was very close to as well when I first got there, right? Kind of looked out for me, kind of took me under his wing, you show me around. And I give him my paperwork, he goes through it, he recognizes some names that are in my paperwork, and he says, you know these, do you know these people? I said, well, these are my guys, right? And so immediately then all of a sudden I was essentially under the watchful kind of protective eye of these Sereños, right? Which I you don't know anything, whatever, but I mean, they instantly were just like, hey, look, anything you need, anything we can do for you, well, thank you very much, and I'll figure it out, right? Don't take the candy bar. That whole lecture, right? Like if somebody offers you something for nothing, like don't take it, whatever you do. So anyway, my head's swimming with these kinds of ideas. Like, man, I want to put myself in a trick bag, messing around with people, right? So anyway, I came in, and right at the very beginning, there was a counselor there named Mr. Lang, and this is in A&O, and I'm being this is during an orientation session, and he essentially says this. He tells us, some of you have very long sentences, and I want you to think about your time here as an opportunity. Don't look at it as an obstacle, right? Don't assume that you're going to do your entire bit. however long that may be, whether it's 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years, don't assume you're going to do that whole bit. In fact, instead, assume that you are not going to do that whole bit and begin to prepare now. Start today, start tomorrow for your release, because it's going to happen. Assume that you're getting out early and be prepared for when that day comes. Well, that resonated with me. Okay. That I understood that. And really, with an 18 year, 8-month sentence, I didn't believe that I was going to do that whole bit anyway. There was just something surreal about it. I couldn't believe that on a drug conspiracy where I had 4.12 grams of powder cocaine as physical evidence in 3 years of investigation, that I was going to get sentenced for 12,600 grams, so 12.6 kilos, and then have my sentence enhanced for being the manager of a criminal enterprise. I don't believe. How does this even? What kind of down the rabbit hole kind of shit is this? This is like Twilight Zone, right? Like I couldn't even believe it. So it just seemed like a bad joke. You know, I remember walking out on the yard when I first got there, and I'm walking on the track and I'm looking at stuff, and my friend Mel's out there with me, another friend of mine, Jeff. And these are guys that I had known for years before I came into the feds, right? They got knocked off by the feds a couple of years before I got knocked off. They fell in '99. I got hit in 2001. Anyway, we're out there walking. I'm looking at the fence. I can't take my eyes off of that fence. And I thought, what do they need so much damn razor wire for? Like they had like 8 rows of razor wire. They had 2 fences with like rows and rows, and they had it all tangled up through the middle and all over the top. And I remember it just seemed so surreal that I had that amount of time to do. And I had to do it all in this environment. And so I said, okay, well, if this is where I have to be, then I have my appeals, eternally optimistic, as if federal appeals go anywhere. Like anybody wins a direct federal appeal, like anybody wins on a 2255, bullshit, you ain't winning. Like once they got you, they have you. That's it. There's no way to cry to. There's no help. It ain't gonna happen. So just get comfortable with it, right? Of course, I didn't know this at the time, so I'm thinking, well, you know, maybe I have something to work with here. I didn't tell on myself. I didn't tell on anybody else. I should have grounds for an appeal. Anyway, I adjusted the environment. Shortly after I went in there, I got celled up with a guy that was actually from California. His name was Bob Rubin. Rest his soul, he's passed away now. He did end up dying from a heroin overdose, I think about a year after he was released. But he and I were celled up for 3 years together. I mean, this was my cellie for 3 years, and this is a guy who grew up through California Youth Authority, San Quentin, had done the whole circuit in the state, was not a good criminal. He had a huge long rap sheet. Like, and I remember him showing me one time his rap sheet, and I looked at it and I said, he's like, man, look at this. And I said, man, Bob, like, did you ever do anything you ever got away with? Did you get caught? I feel like you got caught for absolutely every single thing you ever did. But here's a guy, because of his experience in youth authority in the California state system, which is highly political, right? And then ended up in the feds when he decided to try his hand at bank robbery. He was able to school me, and that's what he did. And I remember coming into the environment, and there were all these intrigues and all these different things going on constantly. And I would hear guys talking in the abstract about the environment, right, Ryan? They would talk about it, and they would say, "Oh yeah, that was overlay for underplay. Here's what was going on there. So and so got checked in. This happened. This happened." And I'm trying to decipher what is really going on, because there's a lot happening that I don't know anything about. And of course, I'm new, so people are disinclined to share anything with me. And in time, what he did is he schooled me by allowing situations on the compound to serve as examples. He would say, okay, here's the scenario. Here's what we know. What do you think? And I would give my input. Well, here's what I think. No. And I'm like, okay, here's another scenario. Here's what I think. And you tell me, and then it would end up being right. He would like have extrapolated out the answer. He would like be able to just map it out and figure out exactly what was going on. So anyway, after a lot of this drilling kind of back and forth, I became very good at reading situations that happened with people, right? And it's really probably largely attributable to the way that he took me under his wing and the way that he schooled me, right? Like he taught me the ropes, right? Like I said, sometime later he was released, and then shortly after that he ended up passing away. But the education he gave me was invaluable, and the idea was, if you're going to be in this environment, you have to know the rules. And there's nothing saying with 18 and a half years you're going to stay at Oxford, Ryan. Anything could happen at any time, and you could get shot off to someplace else that has very different politics, and you need to know what those are. And so for the first 5 years, I was very committed, I think, to just kind of being who I was, right? I was a criminal on the street. I was committed to being a convict, being a solid convict, knowing the code, adhering to it, what have you. About 5 years into my bid, I got into a fight with a bank robber. And after that fight, I beat him up pretty bad, and we ended up getting thrown in the hole for 2 months. So I heard you mention earlier, Ryan, about going to the hole for a couple months for a dirty UA. I went to the hole for a fight. I was in there for 2 months. When we got released, came back to the compound. While I was in there, actually, I started thinking about who I was. Like, how did I end up in jail and prison? First of all, this whole thing is just crazy already anyway, because I'm doing 18 and a half years. And now I just got in a fight because that's what the code kind of calls for. If somebody is disrespectful towards you, you are expected to act. And like the consequence of inaction is worse than the consequence of action, right? So in this case, I ended up going to the hole for 2 months, but the consequence if I didn't fight this guy would have been much worse, because then everybody potentially, I could have set myself up into a position where I would have had to be fighting all the time because nobody respected me because they didn't think I had any heart. And, you know, those are just some of the tough kinds of things that you have to learn how to navigate in prison. It's a funny idea that you can do everything right for years in prison. You could have not told on your case. You could have gone down, been solid, made every right call and lived according to that code. And you could have done it for 10, 15, 20 years. And then all of a sudden, you make one bad call. You make one bad call. You make one bad choice. And now you can negate 20 years. You can negate the fact that you were solid and took the 20-year hit. It's all gone. It's all a wash. That's how unforgiving that environment can be. On the other hand, there's also incredible humanity in prison. I was the beneficiary of that, obviously. I told you about Bob, obviously, and the way he helped me out. I like to think that I paid that forward too and helped to school new guys coming in and not, you know, help them to navigate the environment and mature in certain kinds of ways. Anyway, I got out of the hole. While I was in the hole, I made a decision to reject the environment itself. I was going to walk out, and my social capital in the joint was going to go up, right? Because I beat this dude up. I adhered to the code. I took care of business, whatever. And I knew my social capital was going to go up, but I also knew that what that would do is further entrench me in the politics of prison and the whole mindset, right? And it was in that hole where I had to write home, and I had to tell my children, I had to tell my family why I was in the hole. And they were less than supportive of the idea that I got into a fight in prison. I tried to explain the politics of it, whatever, and explain why I did it, but they didn't understand. And it was maybe one of the few times that I really was ashamed of myself or embarrassed to have to tell them that. And so I, of course, then become introspective, decide I want something more for myself, Ryan. And I say, when I get out, I'm going to reject it all. I'm going to go to school. I'm going to try to apply myself to something more positive, something better. And that's what I did. I got out. I enrolled in college. I got A's. I started participating in, personal development in all different kinds of ways. And later on, I ended up facilitating some groups inside prison based on Napoleon Hill's Keys to Success. I became a facilitator for that. I actually was trained to be a facilitator for that. And so I started teaching my fellow prisoners about the power of positive thought, positive mental attitude, keys to success. And I read a book called Convict Criminology. Convict criminology, of course, is formerly incarcerated people who got out after serving, and not all of them. I mean, there's a core group of convict criminologists that are ex-cons. And what ended up happening was I read this book and it inspired me to want to be involved in convict criminology. I wanted to study crime from an insider's perspective. I wanted to do studies and do theory and develop theory, or at least examine the existing theories in a way that I could maybe make a change or lend my voice to that. So that's what I did. I went to college. A couple of years after I started college, they actually took that program out. They disbanded that college program, and I was devastated. I'd earned some college credits. I had gotten A's in all my classes. I was really upset that I didn't have the opportunity to go on and pursue the education that I knew that I was capable of. At this time, it was 2006. I would not be released for another 9 years at this point. So I went to a culinary arts class. I did that. I took advantage of every educational opportunity that I could in there. And that's what I did. And I bided my time and I waited for the opportunity to get out and pursue my education out here, which is what I did. I graduated with honors 2 years after I was released.
All right. Well, yeah, I mean, Ryan, you already know. Your story has inspired me. Just seeing the way that you carried yourself encouraged me to do time differently. I was miserable up until I met you. I was miserable up until the period that you took me under your wing and showed me how to live a better life. And, I'm eternally grateful for that because, I came from a really solid family. My parents are wonderful people, but there came a point, we've talked about this in great detail. There's two things. There's two things that are the greatest commonality amongst men in prison. Number one, growing up without a father figure. So most men, I was an anomaly in this case. Most men came from a broken family, at least lacking a solid father figure. That was not the case for me, but that's what, from what you were saying and from almost every other person that I've ever done time with, that was the case. Now, what happens when you don't have a father figure, from what I've seen, inside and outside of prison? You start to rally against authority. So as a teenager, you're oppositionally defiant, which is a behavioral disorder that affects adolescents. And that develops into antisocial behavioral disorder. You can grow out of antisocial behavioral disorder from everything I've read about it. But I think one thing that was unique in what you told me, because I definitely had that, and it didn't go away when I started making a decision to better myself. And then ultimately my addiction complicated matters because I relapsed after 3 years and I've been to prison twice since. That's no coincidence. But what I did learn from you um, was how to manage that defiancy. Not everybody that's in an authoritative position is out to get you. It took me years to truly believe it. When I met you, I started considering it, and I'd say I'm finally at the point now where I actually believe it. What do you think about stuff like that? And what was your trajectory like as far as being oppositionally defined, which obviously you were, and then how that developed later and how you overcame it? Because I think it's a very important part of the process for reforming as a criminal.
Okay. So I didn't have oppositional defiant disorder. Actually, I do have a son. My middle son was diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, but they're all variations of this of like ADD, ADHD, oppositional defiant, and then the most extreme, I guess, diagnosis that you can receive as a juvenile because they're disinclined to saddle a kid with this diagnosis, which would be adult psychopathy or antisocial personality. So what they call it in juvenile, a juvenile diagnosis is conduct disorder. And so at age 15, when I got adjudicated delinquent, and I had all these different criminal charges that kind of exploded. When my mom left my stepfather, I was free of any kind of parental authority, really, at that point. I kind of resented my mom for allowing this guy to be in our life for as long as he was. He was gone. My dad was not in the picture. And that was it. I became kind of a law unto myself at 15 years of age, right? And that's when I started running away from home. This is when I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol. This is when I just went full tilt into crime. And shortly after that, when I moved out, actually, crime was the way that I survived. Because when I moved out, I moved in with a bunch of like a bunch of other kids that came from equally broken homes. We moved in together. And how do you pay the bills? How do you eat? How do you dress yourself? And so that's really kind of the formation in the beginning of my criminal personality and things like that. And being that I had conduct disorder already because of the tumultuous kind of chaotic upbringing that I had, it made it easier. And plus I was a little bit more mature maybe than my peers because of the things that I had lived through or gone through. And so that automatically kind of put me in a different position. And it's funny because there's a crime, it's called labeling theory, right? And labeling, it's not a theory to me. I mean, it's a theory, but it's not a theory to me. And essentially what it is it says that authority or positions of authority, and these can be teachers, these can be people in the community, this can be law enforcement. If you label a kid, essentially what you're doing is you've just created an idea for that child. Now, and then what happens is the child internalizes that message. Then you've labeled me a juvenile delinquent. If I feel empowered by being a juvenile delinquent, being seen as bad because now I perceive myself to be somebody vital in the world, where my entire life I was walking on eggshells as a result of stepfather, race, poverty, all these things. And now suddenly I'm a juvenile delinquent, so I'm somebody to be taken seriously, right? I'm a bad boy, right? What you do is you reinforce the person, and it has its own kind of intrinsic reward of having this persona. And then you go on and you actively search for ways that you can perpetuate that. And so I think it's really destructive. I joined the juvenile justice subcommittee of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council for here in Sauk County, and now I chair it. I have for 2 years now. I'm actually going to be stepping down here soon. Is because I about what could have maybe been done differently with me, as far as interventions or really just what's going on at home, what's going on with you, and so anyway, yeah, it's I mean. You did mention oppositional defiant. Like I said, I don't know if it was genetic, because it can be. It can be something innate, inborn. It can also be the result of your environment. And part of me believes that it was my environment that actually led to kind of this conduct disorder.
So
Yeah, I don't
so
know.
so you're so what you're saying is there's a difference between oppositional defiance and a conduct disorder, or conduct disorders under the same umbrella, or I mean oppositional defiance is under the same umbrella as a conduct disorder, or it's two separate things.
So oppositional defiant disorder is one type of personality disorder, and then there's conduct disorder. And so they are two separate, and actually conduct disorder is probably one of the most severe kind of diagnoses you can receive as a child.
You know, in Ryan and I were talking about this yesterday. We'll do these little 5-minute phone calls that turn into like 5 hours of like, debating the cosmos and just, random shit like that. But what I said to him is I said, hey, anytime you enlighten me or like teach me something, I have to like, reiterate it in like more simplistic language. That's just my method of learning. So what you're saying is that conduct disorder is essentially being labeled a certain way because of your behavior, then feeling empowered because of that label, and it being almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're finding that you're empowered and you're getting attention simultaneously. So you've been neglected up until that point. You felt, I don't know. Now they're saying that what is it, juvenile? What was the term? Adjudicated delinquency. Is that what you said? Adjudicated delinquency. I mean, that's a lofty title. It sounds like you need to go to school to get that, but you just get that by getting in trouble, and then you get attention, and that attention leads to more and more trouble. And so that's what you're saying. A way to correct that is to give kids that are going in the wrong direction positive attention. Ask them how they're doing, because people just don't do that. Hey, how are you feeling? Nobody cares about stuff like that. And I think that's probably in the tradition of where mentoring comes from and why they've applied that to so many juvenile delinquents throughout the years, is to assign some sort of surrogate brother role to somebody that's neglected, so that hopefully that positive attention gives them some sense of worth, which everybody should have. And that sense of worth is its own label, and once you're labeled positively, then you can start going in another direction. That's at least how I interpreted what you just said. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, so you're exactly right. There's a saying, people will walk through the doors of your expectations. And I always like that saying because it's no different for kids, it's no different for adults. People really do walk through the doors of your expectations about them. And I think that that's where things like mentoring or say peer support, um, I always think about it in terms of, okay, so if I could go back and I could talk to a younger version of myself, citing my own experience or what I lived through, then what is the conversation I would have with that tough kid when I interacted with him, right? I would share my story in a way that they understood they're not alone, and whatever it is they're going through. And I actually did this. I did this through Boys and Girls Club here, and that was one of the ways that I reintroduced myself to my community, because I talked about the power of personal narrative and the very destructive consequences it can have in your life if at a young age you're not willing to ask for help or to reach out to a trusted adult to help you if you're in a tough situation, right? Like abuse, neglect, whatever it is you're going through. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be any kind of mental health thing, it could be a substance use thing, right? But a willingness, I think, to reach out and ask for help. On the other side of it, if you've already lived it, and you can introduce yourself and you can say, here's me, here's my story, here's what I went through, here was my thinking when I was your age, this is what it led to later in life for me, these are all the things that I lost as a result of that. I've been all the way down that road, kid. There's nothing to see, right? There's nothing to see. You're not going to get your stripes by going to jail. You're not going to get your stripes by going to prison, right? You will not truly be empowered if you develop a criminal persona right now. If you put on that mask right now, you are not empowered. In fact, by virtue of the fact that you've constructed the mask, you've actually lost power.
It's the opposite. You've oppressed yourself, because that's the end result of all criminals, that you're asking for oppression. Always ironic in my situation, because I was raised in a stable family of privilege. Um, Unfortunately, I became a drug addict in my teenage years, and I oppressed myself. Hey, hey government, can you take my liberties away? I'm over them. I don't want to be able to vote. I don't want to be able to own a gun. No, if a pandemic comes and I have to protect myself from looters and mass herds of social unrest, I'm cool. Take my gun. Go ahead. That's not something that I signed up for. And then on top of that, the social stigma, because and that's a big part of the whole thing is that felonies are a social stigma. It's essentially the antithesis of social mobility, of social mobility, and that's why I always look at you. I mean, I knew how you were in prison, and I'm going to bring up the collage thing, which you've already touched on the PBS in a second. If I forget, remind me. um but it's always impressive that you not only have found social mobility. I told you the other day, I look at pictures and I'm like, oh my god, he's an adult. I don't even consider myself, I'm 34, I don't consider myself an adult yet. I still dress like a little skater kid. I look at pictures and I'm like, that's like a contributing member to society, and that's just surface, that's topical. That's not even the laundry list of accomplishments that you've done since you've been out in a very short amount of time. I remember when I first met Ryan. I got a story here. So there's this other guy, and I'm not going to say his name because he's a socially awkward guy, but he's one of the other most intellectual guys I've ever met in my entire life. I think that without him, I would have never become a professional writer. He was basically like having a private professor tutorship. He would teach me things in his very like condescending way that he would. I've told the story. I'd show him renditions of my book, and he'd just read it, the first few pages, and he'd just be like, nah. I'm like, what do you mean, nah? It's not publishable. It's bullshit. Oh, what? And I worked and worked and worked on that manuscript. And eventually, about 2 weeks before I got out, I got it to the place that it's at right now, published. It's been published for going on 6 years. I handed it to him, and he just nodded. He said nothing more complimentary, but it was a nod, and that's all I needed. I knew that it was where it needed to be, and it's the truth, and he like was there for the whole journey. Now, one day, and Ryan and I talked about this yesterday, the first time the first time I was exposed to Ryan, we had a place in Oxford. It was a computer lab, and it was a pretty exclusive area. You could only get in there for a few different reasons. One of them was if you were taking college correspondence classes. I took a few classes, but then I quickly learned that I could take creative writing and use it as a way to conceal the fact that I was writing a book. And then I could go into this little private computer terminal area and write my novel all day, every day with Microsoft Word. Now, this other guy, this other intellectual, I don't even remember. He was getting his master's, I think, or something like that. I think he was getting his master's. And, Ryan would come in there and he would test himself on, what was it? What was that? You just told me yesterday.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So what that was when they finally made the decision to take apart the college prison program that had been there for like 34 years, right? I decided to go to college finally after I've been for 5 years, and they decided they're going to take out the college program that's been there for 34. Go figure. Anyway, they decide in their infinite wisdom that it would be just a really good idea to put in Manufacturer Skills Standards Council training that for manufacturing jobs. Now, this is at a time when the economy, everything's being offshored. There are the whole manufacturing sector had completely shrunk, and they do away with higher education so they could put in this thing. And I remember being told by the supervisor of education at the time when he made the decision to take the college program out, he's like, look, Ryan, I know you're mad. I know a lot, like any of you guys that were in college, I know you're upset about this, but the truth of the matter is, look around. These guys are not thinkers. I got to come up with a program that will allow them to work according to their ability. And I was furious. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm like, you're the supervisor of education, and this was your answer to me? Disgusting. Anyway, sorry, tangent. Go ahead.
No. I'm Are you serious? I'm the master. I'm the Tom Clancy of tangents, man. But anyway, so I remember you were up there doing that, and it was just the three of us. It was me, you, and this other guy. And him and I, as we would always do, we'd get in arguments about absurd stuff. You know, it's like the kind of arguments that you hear when you go in the TV room and you hear people being like, nah, Jay-Z's got more money than 50 Cent. And you hear people arguing about it for like hours. You're like, dude, this is not something that you know the fucking answer to. But this particular thing, there was an answer to. And what the argument was, is I was talking about how I used to get crystals of LSD and it would convert to 10,000 vials, is what I was saying. Now, he was correcting me and saying, now that converts to 1,000 vials. And him and I was like, how are you going to say that? I sold this for years. He's like, well, if you sold it for years, you should probably know that 1 gram of crystal LSD converts to 1,000 vials. And we argued about it. And I remember you sitting in the corner and you were neutral, you were indifferent, and you kind of just had this smile, and I took it as like a smile of arrogance because you know, and that's probably just my own over analytical you know, weird social disorders that have developed throughout the years with insecurities. But I remember that was my first impression of you. And then you know, this guy, this particular guy, Ryan, just told me the story yesterday. So back when they were doing education at Oxford, they would bring in outside educators, outside teachers from the local college. It was from Baraboo. How do you say it? Baraboo?
UW, University of Wisconsin, Baraboo County. So
Baraboo.
yeah, it
Okay,
was a
Baraboo. Okay, and so I guess they gave both of these guys. Well, no, they gave Ryan this test, and it was to see where you're at with algebra. You know, it's basically it's like a reading. No, what was it? Go ahead.
no. Okay, so what it was
You tell
actually
the story. It's your story, not my
no. I mean,
story.
it's not that. I mean, it's no big deal, really. It was so Charlie and I were we were in this class
Hmm.
together, and we took the algebra final, and I think there were like maybe 25 of us that were in that class. Anyway, afterwards, our professor, we met in the chapel for graduation, and he came up, shook my hand, and congratulated me on the score that I got on his final. And he said that he'd been doing this for X number of years, 30, 35, 40 years, whatever it was. And he had never had that score on his final. And not only did it happen this one time, it happened twice. It was me and this other guy. And so that's all it was. It was just that me and him had the exact same final score on this guy's math exam, algebra exam, and he had never seen a score or that score duplicated twice.
Which is really funny because, honest to God, there's probably about 3 guys in my entire life that I've met. 3 people. I'm not going to say that's exclusive to men, but 3 people that I thought were the most intellectually sophisticated in a number of ways. And 2 of those 3 I met at this same prison, and the math teacher made the same connection. You know, in his 35, 40 years of teaching, he only had 2 people get this ridiculously high score. And it was both of them. And so I remember, you know, and on top of being very intellectual, you know, what did you weigh? 150 pounds at the time, and you could bench like what was your 1 rep max for flat bench at that time when you were like 150 pounds?
315. I
315.
got yeah.
For three, he's bench pressing 315, and he's weighing 150 pounds. And pound for pound, you were labeled the strongest person on the compound many years, right? Many years, because that's how they quantify that. They take
Yeah,
how much you weigh, and then they compare it to what your 1 rep max is. Correct?
right. So there are 3 lifts: deadlift, squat, and bench. And then they would apply what was called the Schwartz formula to your 3 lifts. You got 3 opportunities for each lift. They added it all together. They applied the formula based on your body weight, and that gave just kind of like a differential. And then wherever you landed. And we would have one on 4th of July weekend, and we would have another one on New Year's weekend. And so twice a year, and one was sponsored by like the White Car, and then then the other meet would be sponsored by like the black car. And that way both races were actually, it was a positive way for both races to get involved in something like weightlifting together and to compete. But it was like, it was healthy, it was good, they split the sponsorship and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, the physical side of things, I think that was really important. It
Yeah,
was good. It was good for your mental health. Go ahead.
for sure. And hey, by the way, Ryan, just before I forget, because one time I was talking on my show, I was doing a video and I was talking about my weightlifting. And I said that at one point, one of the highlights of my life was that I deadlifted 495 pounds, almost 500 pounds. You were there. You're the one that got me up to that. And people were like, you're lying. So, hey, that's true, right? I deadlifted 495.
You definitely did it. You pulled the 5 plates. You got it up. You were bucking and shaking, but you got it all the way up. So that was good money. I think about.
That was one of the highlights of my life. When you go back on that highlight reel where like you do something really cool, and it was like in front of a bunch of people and like people that didn't even like me, because I'm sure people can imagine in prison I'm a loudmouth, attention seeker. You either love me or you hate me. There's really not like middle ground opinions about me. And like even people that hated me like went up to Ryan and they're like, damn, he did 495. Like they were like impressed by it and they didn't like me. Right?
No, but I think most people there actually liked you, whether they hung out with you or made time to hang out with you or any of that kind of stuff. You know how cars are. Cars are just very kind of closed up and they do their own thing. But that particular car, I know you mentioned the workout car. It was actually, so you talked about the way the weights were waiting for us when we would arrive, and the reason that is because you had different people in that particular car that were calling it for different states. And that's really what it came down to. The car itself that you came into actually was composed of people that were kind of on the vanguard of putting out fires amongst the other groups, whether it be other state cars or with gangs. And that's really kind of where it came from. Yeah, so I count myself as being very fortunate to have had the experience that I had. I got out, and of course, my priorities changed. It wasn't really as much about the physical side of things. That was something I did while I was in there because I had a lot of time to be able to do it. But when I got out here, I got released on March 5th of 2015. So about 5 years ago, a little over, about a month over being 5 years now. I got released and I thought, okay, what do I have to do? Now I got to try to figure out how to make it out here in the world, because really being gone for 14 years, the world itself out here had become an abstraction to me. Like I knew everything about the environment in prison, right? I knew how to navigate that environment. I had lived it for 14 years. For 4 years, I had the keys to the car for white Wisconsin, right? So I was the shot caller for anybody white from Wisconsin. Okay. So I had an identity. I was known and I knew the rules of the environment that I lived in, and the structure I did really well with. I mean, I was institutionalized. How can you do that much time and not be institutionalized, right? It's a necessity. You better come up with a program. You better figure out how to bid. And that requires a program.
That's where the collage. Oh, go on. But then remind me about the collage. I got to make a point about that. But go on.
Okay. In fact, I'll go back, and I know you call it a collage. I'll go back and I'll just touch on that really quickly.
It's so important. So important. So go
on. Okay. So what you're referring to is actually a vision board. And so a vision board was one of the things that we actually utilized in the PMA Science of Success program, or whatever, this Napoleon Hill program that I was facilitating for 3 years while I was in there. So one of the things was, as an activity, we told people constantly to keep your mind on the things you do want and off of the things you don't want. And it's not the same thing, right? Well, I'll just keep my mind on the things that I want. Well, no, but equally important is keeping your mind also off of the things you don't want. And it's, and obviously, I mean, people are familiar with ideas like The Secret, and I'm not going to get into any kind of like deep, I'm not going to get into metaphysics and quantum mechanics and quantum physics and all that kind of stuff or whatever, but there is a belief that I embrace that says that reality itself, the vibratory nature of reality itself, is consciousness. And I, by virtue of being a sentient being, have the ability to alter the experiences that I have by focusing on certain things and keeping my mind also off of other things. I used to always tell people, so I had two mantras. One was, what I think about, I bring about. I constantly reminded myself that. What I think about, I bring about. So now you're thinking about keeping your mind on something, keeping it off of something else, right? And then what I do today is important because I'm exchanging a day of my life for it. And it gives a sense of urgency to what you do and the finite amount of time you have to live. We only have so many grains in the hourglass. What are you going to do? What are you going to do with yours, right? So anyway, what I did in there is I created this vision board, and the vision board was actually we would take magazines, we would cut them up, we would take images of things, and this is how I always instructed my students in there, right? And I did this for myself too, though. I didn't just talk about it and then not do it myself. I would put together a vision board, and I would write in inspirational quotes or phrases and have images of things. And I remember the best revenge is success was one of the things that I had on there, right?
I remember. I
And
literally remember
the
that
best
one.
thing, right? So I mean, I know you saw my vision board in there or whatever. From the street corner to the corner office was just something that I had clipped out of some magazine. I put that up there. So anyway, I focused on these things, and as long as they made me enthusiastic about my future, when I could look at them and I could see them and inhabit a space in my mind where that was my reality. It wasn't in here in prison. I would put on my MP3 player, I would play my music, I would look at my vision board, and I would think about what the shape of my life post-release, right? What does it look like? What's it feel like? And I would immerse myself in that image. I would visualize it that way, right? And so when I got out, also in preparation for my release, I wrote a reentry plan. And I wrote this reentry plan, and I put a lot of thought into it, and I read it, and I revised it, and this is all the way up right until I got released. Maybe a couple days before was my last revision. Literally, like I was revising that thing right up until I got out, and then I got released, and it got misplaced, but missed a bunch of other papers and things like this, right? So anyway, skipping ahead years later, I end up finding this thing. And what I found was that my reentry plan, no, when I first initially got out, I gave a copy of it to my PO. Then I lost my copy. That's what happened. My PO had a copy, so he knew I was serious about my reentry because I had done a damn plan enough to put it together here. This will help keep me on track, and you'll know what I'm up to, right? And that's what I did. I kind of systematically, I lost my copy of it, but I kind of systematically, without even actually remembering it, I went to college. I graduated with honors. I reintroduced myself to the community in a positive way. I'm from a small community, man. I'm like 12,000 people or something. It's really small. So small communities have long memories. All they really remember about me is that I was a drug dealer who went away on a federal conspiracy for 18 and a half years for selling 12 and a half kilos, right? And then I come back to this little 12,000 person town, and they're like, oh man. Didn't help either that, law enforcement, of course, a year before you get released, are notified by the BOP, the state general, and he disseminates that information down to where you're going. So a year before you even get out, if you're in there on a drug trafficking conspiracy, they know you're coming. They've known for a year. They're just looking to get eyes on you now, right? So I show up in the small community, I come back home, and I know the way the community looks at me, and I know what they think about me, and I know that it's all bad. Everything about it is bad. And so realizing that talk is cheap and that action was going to be the only thing that actually proved to anybody that I was not the person that I used to be, I did it by way of service. I actually came home, I introduced myself, I shared my story. Like I said, the power of personal narrative with the kids at Boys and Girls Club. This led to a speaking opportunity to raise money for scholarships. We raised thousands of dollars of money for that, and then I was invited by their board to join their board. So I joined their board of directors for the scholarship nonprofit here in my hometown. And then that also, by reconnecting going to college, that connected me to my old college professor while I was at Oxford in the prison. She proposed me for membership to join the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council in Sauk County so that I would kind of represent the formerly incarcerated voice at the table, right? They didn't have anybody at the table like that. It was all judges. It was the prosecutor of Sauk County. It was the head public defender. It was made up of various other stakeholders, but these are the people that come around the table and figure out new programs or evaluate old programs or implement criminal justice in the county. And I ended up being accepted on as the ex-convict voice. So my voice was heard, my vote was counted. So all these things kind of incrementally, they just added up, and there is a powerful synergistic effect. It seems like the smallest effort put in by a person with good intent, it's like the entire universe bends to accommodate that effort, that small effort on your part. And it seems like out of so many different areas, people come to help. They applaud the effort, and then they give you more opportunities, right? And that's been very much my experience. And then by them helping me and giving me space, my community allowing me space to become somebody different, the idea of backsliding, going back and being involved in a criminal lifestyle is inconceivable to me. I understand why I was who I was. I understand how I got there. I also understand that it was rooted in weakness, the development of this criminal persona, all the bravado, all the tough guy stuff, all the criminal, like whatever, right? That's all huff and puff. The truth, like the way I see it now, when I see criminality, I'm just like, oh, like you don't even know who you are. And that's really, to me, it's sad. It's like you need to, I would like nothing more for you than to figure it out, what you've gone through that told you that being a criminal is good
Yeah,
or is romantic.
being a good father, being a good son, being a good friend, being a good contributor to society, making your mark on the world in the best way that you can. That's being solid. None of this prison politics shit and people that are like, oh, dude, you did this. And it's like, look, man, who gives a shit? I have a great life that I've assembled. And that's why I brought up the collage. Uh, a lot of times you would try to instill things in me through conversation, although I don't think you were ever too heavy-handed, because I think that would take some of the power out of learning these things for myself. But you gave me enough guidance and enough room so that I could develop that way. And one thing that I think you were telling me, because I remember the collage, we'll call it, you call it the vision board, and that's the correct name. I'll always remember it as the collage, because people would say stuff. Incidentally, people that have done nothing with their lives since they've been out of prison, but they'd be like, oh, Ryan, he's been institutionalized for a decade. Look how weird he is. He cuts out, photographs of like cars that he wants, and like, little motivational phrase. He read one too many self-help books, and yeah, he's, and then, in my underdeveloped sense of the world, because it was limited at that point, and it developed just through experience and a perception shift at that point, I was like, how sad. Institutionalized. He cuts out the pretty girl because he's been with guys for 10 years, been around men for 10 years. He cuts out the car that he wants. because he thinks that he'll get it sometime. He does this because he thinks this. No, recently I've gone, okay, so my best friend, one of my best friends died, Paul, you know this. And I fell off the deep end. I was losing myself again. I crawled out of that. So now I'm in another phase of self growth. I'm working out again. I'm getting into art. I'm reading. I'm writing. Because it's a balance between mind, body, and spirit. And I'm being altruistic because when I help other people, it makes me feel better about myself. I pay that karmic debt. It's definitely something that you help instill to me. But one thing that I didn't pick up at the time that's a recent revelation is subjective reality, and what you're talking about and what the purpose of the vision board was. I used to look at goals and ambitions that I had, and I did achieve a lot of things that I said that I would, and I certainly made a strong effort to do that. But the way that I did it, if I had the perception that I have now, it would have been so much more painless. I looked at a goal and I said, okay, these are the obstacles that are going to be in my way to achieve that goal. All reality is subjective. You can look at the same situation, and instead of saying obstacles, you say, these are things I need to do to get from point A to point B. These things are not going to slow me down. It's simply a list of things that I need to do to get from point A to point B. And that's a recent development. And it's very liberating once you realize that 99% of your life is what you make of it. 99% of your life is your perception of it. If you choose to be happy and a good person, you're going to be happy and a good person. And if you want to achieve things, there's nothing that you can't achieve. You want to write a book about your life, do it. Figure out what you need to do to get from point A to point B, and you'll get it done. Ryan's a great example of that. And we touched on some of the many fantastic achievements he's had since he's been out. And I told you personally how much he's affected me in a positive way. And now PBS is doing a segment during the PBS NewsHour, brief but
It's called
spectacular moment.
correct. It's called Brief but Spectacular. So Steve Goldblum um, is the one that created it, and that in and of itself, it's not that I ever had any idea or belief that I would ever have the opportunity to share just a short, brief is brief. I think it's maybe 5 minutes, 4 minutes, something. But I never thought I'd ever have the opportunity to have something put on national television. I certainly didn't look for it, but one way or another, again, things happen in funny ways. When you do the right things for the right reasons, incredibly, almost they seem almost miraculous. Really, it's just incredible. But I mean, my life already is kind of a testament to the fact that if you're positive and if you're doing the right thing, more good things are going to be added to you. It's just kind of how things work out. So my small hometown newspaper in Wisconsin, an article was written about how incarcerated parents try to remain connected and relevant in their children's lives while they're serving their term of incarceration. This piece made it to somebody, I want to say in the LA Times, is the way that it was described to me by the reporter who wrote the article. And it went there, and then it got passed from there to a colleague who was Steve Goldblum, who then contacted my director of human services, because I work, obviously you mentioned, I heard you mention that. I work in the human service, mental health and recovery services unit of the human service agency here in Sauk County, and reached out to my director and said, I would like you to give my information to Ryan, because I'm interested in interviewing him or talking to him about this. And when I talked to him, he said that there were things, and it really, I think one of the things that hit him, if I remember correctly, was that he read that when I was given the 18, first of all, when I got sentenced, I wouldn't allow anybody to be in the courtroom because I knew what kind of an emotional impact it was going to have on them. And I told every single person who loved and cared about me, do not come. my guideline is 180 to 235 months. I'm going to get 235 months. There's no good reason for you to be there to see that. I don't want you to be there, experience that, and then me have to see you go through that. I'm going to have to, that will just devastate me, right? So you can't come. Because my girlfriend at the time, we had my daughter Amira, who just had a child, so I just became a grandfather, which is another milestone that if I had gone back and decided I wanted to continue on this criminal lifestyle or whatever, I would have missed that. I wouldn't even been here for that. I already missed all my children's upbringings, right? As a result of where I've been. Fortunately, that's all on the mend. Anyway, she was pregnant with my youngest son, Ryan, my namesake. And he was born in December 29th, after I got there in 2015, or in 2001 rather. So I told her, I said, look, I got 18 and a half years. I can't be a father with that kind of, like, I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm not going to push you away, but the truth of the matter is I have a very long time. I'm not asking you to do this sentence with me. You're young, you're pretty, we have 2 children. When the time comes for you to move on, you go ahead and you do that with no regrets. I understand. You didn't do this to me, I did this to myself. And they deserve to have a good role model in their life. You deserve to be happy. So, and that's how it ended. You know, she was with me for a while and whatever. But anyway, I think he read that particular thing the way that I said, when it's time for you to move on, go ahead and move on and do it with no regrets. I understand. And it just really hit him because he had just started a family himself. And just something about it just really, I think, resonated with him.
It's visceral. Yeah, I mean, it's poignant. And you know, I mean, and that's why I chose to have this episode be as long as it did, because of how many lessons I've learned from you. You know, like, honestly, if I died tomorrow, I can say with complete sincerity that you were one of a handful of the most influential people in a positive direction that I ever had. And I appreciate you so much for that. I honestly don't know if I'd be alive if you hadn't come into my life at that particular moment. Just the way that I am, if I hadn't changed my mentality at that point, if I'd gotten out of prison, still being a drug addict with 4 years of federal probation, you know, that's just a recipe for disaster, because you know, the odds are already stacked against you. And as addicts, we get very I'm speaking for myself and other drug addicts, you know, we get very we get a bad case of the fuck it's, you know, is probably the best way to say it. And when you're an IV heroin user, and I had already been one for like over a decade at that point, a case of the fuck it's with a case of Russian roulette with your life, statistically, most people don't survive that. You know, it's a terminal disease. And, you know, I've lost a lot of people I care about along the way. So I want to thank you for everything that you've done for me. And I think it's going to be, I know you're starting a YouTube channel, and I think that your insight's going to be very valuable for other people. I hope that other people can get some of the same lessons from what you've been through and what you're continuing to do that I have. So where can people find you? I'll leave all the links in the pinned comment section and in the description, but talk about you know, various places that can find you, things that you have going, where they can go for more information about it, and we'll close with that.
Honestly, and I probably have to be forgiven for this because obviously, even though I've been out about 4.5 years free now, I don't know technology. I'm still learning technology. I'm still trying to figure out things like Zoom and all these other kinds of things, which is just mind blowing to me. But I mean, 14 years, there's a lot of technological development that happened. And when I came home, I was working all the time. I didn't even have an opportunity really to learn this stuff. But I will share with you my YouTube link so that you can include it here. That way, anybody that's looking for it, they can just go there and find it. I can't even remember. Honestly, I don't even remember. Like, I literally just like put something up there because I wanted to make sure that I am talking specifically about reentry, positive reentry stories, and reentry related like tips and tricks, and just kind of the things that people found to be workable for their own reentry, just as a resource, right? Like, and it'll feature people who have successfully reentered, people who have already lived it, walked it, and kind of figuring out how to identify resources in your given area, and all these kinds of things. So I really want to like highlight the positive, good, contribute, the way that people that are formerly incarcerated contribute in their communities, just really good stuff like that. I'm not looking to sensationalize anything about the criminal lifestyle. Totally unimpressed with who I used to be that way. Lived it, did it, seen it, over it. It's more now about the positive things going on here. I would like people to, especially if they watch this and they are formerly incarcerated and they have gone on to pursue some form of higher education. Now, that can be vocational. You can be an associate, a bachelor's, a master's, all the way up to PhD. I would like you to find formerly incarcerated college graduates network. There's a public page and a private page. If you are formerly incarcerated, you can join the private page. If you're not, but you are sympathetic to the goal of advancing prison education or helping connect people to opportunities educationally or through work opportunities, then join the public page. So cons, formerly incarcerated people, non-formerly incarcerated people, there's a place for you there. So I would encourage people to go and check that out. And it would be really cool if anybody wants to watch this PBS Brief but Spectacular piece. My understanding is that it has not aired yet. So I think typically the Brief but Spectacular is on PBS NewsHour on Thursday evening, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, check it out. Otherwise, you can find it on the Facebook pages, and I know you're going to include the link in this. So thank you very much for having me. It's been an honor. It's always a pleasure. We always have good conversations. So
We always do.
you.
We always do, Ryan. Thank you so much. You're a brother to me. I love you. Happy Easter to you and your family. And well, I got to end with, what am I going to end with, guys? Am I going to do palabra? Palabra.